Alright, so we're going to make roasted 3C bread from this cookbook here. This is the Brother Juniper's bread book. It was given to me by someone who lives in the assisted living facility with my mother. When I first looked at this, and it looked a little old-fashioned to be honest with you, but one of the things that I noticed totally serendipitously was that this is Peter Reinhardt. My daughter gave me this book for Christmas. This is The Bread Baker's Apprentice. And what I noticed was it was written by Peter Reinhardt. So it's the same guy. And then he went on to become an instructor at the Culinary Institute of America. I've watched a couple of his videos on YouTube. He's a pretty interesting guy. And this is what I would call, and what's known as a stiff dough. So there's two main bread type doughs. There's the stiff dough, and these are the ones that you think of where you have to do all this kneading. And then there's the artisanal type bread. They're made with what's called a slack dough. So there's a lot of water, high hydration bread. So that's what when I was giving you loaves of bread, that's what I was learning to make, were those high hydration loaves. So they're anywhere from 70 to 90% water, which is a huge difference. This dough will not have that much liquid in it. So, and then this dough will be enriched. It will have buttermilk, honey, some vegetable oil. Those are the fats that enrich the dough. So this dough will need to be baked in a bread pan. And the big thing that has changed baking for me is this. This is a scale. So I went from what they call volume measurements, cups, tablespoons, those kinds of things, to weight. And I use metric, I use grams, it's just easier. King Arthur Flour, on their website, they have a page where you can enter ingredients in, and they will give you what a certain amount is by weight. So water, milk, flour, different types of flour, everything from the seeds. So I have converted the recipe, his recipe here, which was all in cups, to weight, and we will use weight measurements. And I found that it's more accurate, and it's led to better, more consistent results for me. And then the other thing about this bread is the water, the buttermilk and the water, it's kind of a range. It gives you a range of water. So you'll just kind of have to judge how wet that dough will need to be and how stiff it will be, and you'll see all this when we get it together. So I want to talk about flour next. So I've got all-purpose flour here, and we've got bread flour here. Now, the recipe calls for bread flour. What's the difference between all-purpose flour and bread flour? Well, the big thing is the protein content. This bread flour has a higher protein content, so it is better for yeasted breads. So breads, rolls, pizza, those kinds of things. Bread flour is not good for things where you want a lower protein content, what they call a softer flour, which would be like biscuits, pancakes, cookies, cakes. Those kinds of things are not ideally what you use bread flour for in all-purpose flour. So all-purpose flour sort of sits in between like a cake flour and a bread flour. So it's good for everything. It's good for cookies, it's good for cakes, and it's good for bread. You can start off with all-purpose flour and be just fine. If you have a Costco membership, you can get this at Costco, the all-purpose flour. I think it's 12 pounds, and you can get it for $6, which is quite a deal. Their products, King Arthur Flour, their products, I've used a lot of them. I found them to be very good. So I've got my scale set up. And the way this scale particularly works is you can zero it out at any point, which is helpful because then you don't have to do all this math in your head of how many grams of flour, and if you've already got something in the bowl and you need to add more, and what all that comes out to. So this dough is going to start off with 960 grams of bread flour. So that's, according to the book, that's 8 cups. So I'm going to put my bowl on. Hopefully you can see this. And I'm going to hit 0. So I'm going to go for 960 grams of bread flour. hopefully you can see that. I've got 960 grams of flour. Now we've got the yeast. I know you've talked about struggling with yeast, and I'm going to show you how I do it. I buy yeast, again, at Costco in a big container. I put what I need in these little resealable ones, and I keep it in the freezer. You can buy Red Star yeast, Fleischmann's yeast, any kind of yeast. You can buy the 3 little packets that you get in the grocery store. Again, I take his tablespoon measurement of yeast and I convert it to weight. So I need 7 grams of yeast. And they'll tell you instant yeast or active dry yeast. Just you've probably seen the 2 types. There's the cake type, which I think is usually by the butter, if it still even exists. Most people don't use it. They use the dry yeast. You can use instant or active dry. Instant yeast is supposed to start faster. It's got citric acid or something in it that allows it to get going quicker. It's really not a whole lot of difference. I just use the regular active dry yeast. So one of the things my mother taught me about yeast is a living organism. And just like you, it doesn't like to be too hot, it doesn't like to be too cold. Yeast will certainly activate in cold water. It will just take a long time to get going. If I take you and throw you into a 66-degree swimming pool at Lakeside Swim Club in May, you are not going to like it. You're going to be chilled to the bone. If I put you in a 120-degree bathtub, you are not going to like it. It's the same thing. So ideally, your temperature of the water should be, I don't know, between 95 and 105, 110 degrees. You can use a thermometer until you sort of learn to judge. You can use the, sort of the baby formula test where you put some water on the back of your wrist and, just, again, you don't want it too hot, you don't want it too cold. The thing about water, some people say use spring water because chlorinated water that comes out of the tap has fluorine in it. Fluoride. Fluoride is an antifungal ingredient, so it's a yeast inhibited. I used to buy gallons of spring water, and then I had to keep them, and then when you pull them out, you had to warm them up in the microwave, and then they'd be too hot and too cold. It just got to be a big hassle. I just use water out of the tap. I generally don't have any problem with it. The recipe calls for almost 2 cups of water. We're going to take maybe 4 tablespoons of that, quarter of a cup, whatever, just enough to wet the yeast and to float, to get it. The warm water is what's going to activate the yeast. So we're going to pour some warm water in there and let it sit for a few minutes to activate. So I'm going to take this warm water I have, it's around 100 degrees, and I'm going to pour it on top of the yeast. We're just kind of wetting it. Oh, this yeast wet. You can even, I'm being kind of stingy here with the water. You can even add a little bit more water. But what I wanted to show you right off the bat is there are bubbles in the yeast. And that is telling you it's activating. So now I've got all my ingredients. I've got my flours, salt, buttermilk, honey, yeast. I've got my seeds over there. I need to grab them. I'm going to get all that together, and then the last thing we've got to get is the rest of this water, the rest of the liquid. One of the things you do with these seeds is you put them in a little pan, heat them on the stove, warm them up, and then get them out of the pan and let them cool back down. And that just brings out some flavor in them. That's really the big purpose for doing that. But these are all ready to go. So I've got my bowl. I'm going to mix my ingredients. And you being a dog owner can appreciate. Got to get the dog hair out. I'm going to do all my dry ingredients. I'm going to save a little bit of flour, just a little bit to knead with. There, that's my wheat bran. There goes the salt. Seeds. I'm going to use my hands to mix. here comes our yeast. Time to get to work, guys. Do your thing, gals and gals. Buttermilk. The milk just adds flavor. Honey. Here goes all the water. Again, I'm going to save a little bit. I'm going to mix this up and see how stiff it is. If I feel like it's too stiff, it needs more water. If I've made pancake batter, then I'll need to add a little bit more flour to it. It's looking pretty dry, so I'm going to add the rest of the water. And now it's time to knead. Floured surface, and I'm going to use the rest of the flour and the ingredients that are in the bowl. I'm going to incorporate all this in. I've got sort of a blob of dough. Your hands are going to get a little sticky. I've got a bench knife or a dough scraper here. You can get these on Amazon, cookbook places, cooking places. Here's a couple of different ones to see what they look like. But I've got my sort of ball of dough here. I'm folding it in half towards me. Then I'm using the heels of my hand and I'm just kind of pushing down on it. Then I'm turning it a quarter turn and repeating. So if you press too hard, it's going to stick to you. So there's no misnomer. You don't need to beat the dough up. You don't need to be really rough with it. You're just, what the kneading is doing is it's, as you can see, it's mixing the rest of these ingredients. And it's activating the gluten. So it's starting to stick just a little bit. So here's the rest of my flour. So again, fold in half, seal it, quarter turn. Fold in half, seal it, quarter turn. Fold in half, just that little push, quarter turn. You'll find it's very peaceful, relaxing, contemplative, whatever term. So I've been kneading for 12 minutes. This is about done. And you can see, compared to the beginning, how much smoother, sort of come together it is. You've mixed all the ingredients. You can see the seeds poking through. You can see the brown flakes from the wheat bran. And the book says the dough should be elastic, soft, tacky, but not sticky. And the seed should be evenly distributed. I think we've got that. So again, it's a little tacky, but not terribly sticky. It's elastic. If I tug on it, it's going to bounce right back. That's one of the signs that it's been kneaded enough. And now this is where you've got the downtime. It's going to rise. The book says 45 minutes to an hour and a half. The big thing I want to stress to you is don't go totally by on what the time says in the book. There's so many variables. If your water was really cold and your yeast was a little slower to start, then it's going to take longer. If it's 68 degrees in my kitchen right now, it's going to go a little slower today than it will a few weeks ago when it was 95 degrees outside and 72, 75 degrees in my kitchen. The warmer it is, the quicker it will rise. You don't want to rush the rising. You want it to take its full time. So the yeast is going to, again, munch on all the starches and sugars in the dough, start giving off carbon dioxide, gas, and you want to trap that gas and it's going to expand. So I'm going to put it in the bowl, and I take a little bit of canola oil. I kind of make the dough into a ball, tucking underneath, make a tight little ball. I'm just poking the seeds down. I make a check for dog here. I'm rubbing oil on the dough. And really, it's to do two things. It's to keep it a little on the moist side and keep it from sticking to the bowl too bad. But my bread is in the bowl. It's kind of sealed up in here. It's got its own little nest. And now it just needs to rise. So it needs to be someplace warm. You can let it rise in the refrigerator. It just may take you 4, 5, 6 hours. You can turn your oven on if it's got a proof cycle, you can turn the proof cycle on. You could just put it in your oven and turn the oven light on. You don't want it by an open window where it's drafty. I could leave it here, it's fine, the window's closed, but in the wintertime when your house is cold, you just want it in sort of a warm place. So again, it says an hour, 45 minutes to an hour and a half. I'm going to give it at least an hour and see where it is. It's going to rise up to the top of this bowl. If it doesn't rise, that's because my yeast wasn't active. So if after 45 minutes it's risen a third of the way, it doesn't mean that your yeast wasn't active, it didn't work, it just needs more time. Okay, the dough is risen. It took about 2 hours, maybe even a little bit more. You can see it's full of gas, it's full of air, bubbles. We'll take it out of the bowl. Sprinkle flour on the counter. I don't know if you can hear that popping. It's all the gas that the yeast developed. We're just going to give it a little bit of a kneading. So I've got it kneaded just very briefly. You're just what they're calling degassing it. You're just popping some of the bubbles that are in it. I'm going to take my bench knife and I'm going to cut the dough in half, roughly. And this is where I'm going to use my scale. So I'm going to make a ball. So that's 830 grams. This one already feels bigger. Yeah. This is almost a kilogram. So almost 1,000 grams. So I'm going to cut a little bit off. I'm just trying to get 2 equal size loaves. 880. So now I'm going to make 2 loaves. I'm going to shape them. And they're going to bake in these bread pans. I've got these 2 pans greased with some Crisco. That's to keep it from sticking. You can use butter or non-stick spray. I found Crisco works best. So I'm going to take my rolling pin, give myself a little bit of room, get a tiny bit of flour, you can see as I'm rolling this out, it's just contracting right back on me. It's annoying. Again, this rolling pin is so wide, it's a little challenging. You just got to keep at it. I'm going to let this one rest while I do this one. I'm trying to shape a long rectangle. Now you're just going to roll it up like a jelly roll. Tuck the ends under and give it a good roll. in your pan. If it absolutely fights you while you're working it, just let it sit for a minute or two, 15 minutes, walk away from it. That gluten will relax, then you'll be able to shape it. Now you've got another set of downtime. This is called proofing. So I cover it with a towel, not plastic wrap, because it's actually got to have some room to grow. You don't want the plastic wrap to constrain it. So again, this is going to be the same sort of thing. Another hour, hour and a half. It should start to rise up and expand in the pan. Okay, now it's risen. It's getting close to the top of the bread pans. This is usually when I preheat the oven. All right, these are ready to bake. Oven's at 350. I've got a little egg and some milk. This is called an egg wash. So those pictures of those German rolls that you saw, they were all shiny. This is how they do it. This is another reason why I use Crisco, because it still may stick, because you're kind of like gluing it, the loaf to the pan. So we're just going to brush the loaf with the egg wash. And then I've got some poppy seeds. Into the oven at 350. They're going to bake for 45 minutes. So halfway through, I'm going to move them around. And that helps them bake a little more evenly. Okay, 45 minutes later, this is what we've got. 2 loaves. Looks really good. I wish you could smell it. It smells fabulous. We're going to turn them out and take a look at them. If you flip them over, they should sound hollow. That's how you know they're done. Just be sure to let them cool thoroughly before you slice into them. You know, they need to cool for at least a half an hour, 45 minutes. And enjoy. Try it.